Thanks for coming, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Adria Adi, one of the music faculty here at CSM. It's great to see everyone. Very happy to welcome you all to the first talk of the year for our music and technology, or I should say careers in music and technology guest speaker series. We've had 8 guest speakers so far across the past 2 years that we've been doing the series. And so we invite people to come talk about their career path, how they got to where they are, and a little bit about what they do in their jobs. Within this realm of music and technology, there's so many varied career paths in this world. So it's great to just hear a little bit about the different types of jobs that people are doing in the field. Thank you to, I have to say thank you to Strong Workforce and Perkins for their support of funding support for this program, also to the college for its support, and our division, Creative Arts and Social Science, and our dean, Jean-Marie Velikovic, for all of her support. Couldn't do it without you. Of course, Nicolas, thank you so much, the man behind the camera, our flyer designer, and our official archiver of all of our guest speaker talks. You can find a number of our previous guest speaker talks on YouTube, on the CSM Dig Me, that's DGME, YouTube channel. So if you want to check out any of our previous speakers, please do. And I feel like I should be saying something else, but I'm probably forgetting things. Thank you so much. I guess I'll just introduce our speaker. Lien Do is a musician and a music producer, sound engineer doing recording and mixing, also a teacher, co-manager of different FIRST studios in the Mission District in San Francisco, a really interesting historic studio. Also a teacher teaching sound, not quite, I can't remember what the class was, but teaching, at UC Santa Cruz, and I guess we'll find out how they're able to accomplish all of these things in their daily life. So yeah, thanks so much for coming. Great to see you all here, and I will pass it over to Lien. And we'll have about 30 minutes at the end, so we'll go to about 1 and then have 30 minutes for Q&A. So maybe hold questions until then.
Thank you, Adria, so much for inviting me to this. Yeah, my name is Lien. I also go by Leviathe, which is like my artist name, producing name. I was just gonna go through a few things on slides, and then I was gonna go and hop into Protools and actually show you live, like what I do at work. So first, I'm gonna do history, then mixing, and then resources. I'm just gonna try to go as fast as I can through them, because talking about myself is terrible for me. So we'll see. But I got a set of questions that I was asked to answer. So yes, my name is Lien. I work within music. I live in San Francisco. I work as a musician, music producer. I teach, and then I run a studio. I also do a lot of film stuff, but that's here. So different FIRST studios I co-manage with somebody named Grace Coleman. It's the oldest music studio in the Bay Area. It's used to be like Brian Eno's, Devo's, Herbie Hancock's studio, and it just has had a lot of hand owners over time, and then me and my co-manager are like the newest ones, and I think it's like the 4th iteration of it. So I mostly head engineer there and manage it. I, with one of my really close friends, have started a post-production film audio studio called LIEMA, where we do a lot of like documentary, commercial mixing, and sometimes we go on set to film shoots to record. So then I do those two, and then Text Me Records is a record label that's above the studio, so there's like a huge building in the Mission District. The person who owns the building lives on the very top, and then the second level there's a studio, and that's for the record label, and then the bottom studio is Different Fur, and that's where I run but I am signed to Text Me Records as a music producer, so I work with like a ton of artists in like LA, New York, here, or online overseas, and I just will make the music for whatever artists they send me, or do a lot of writing camps in LA and here. I just started doing Women's Audio Mission, where I'll teach sometimes there, Protools and like large format studio stuff, and I engineer there sometimes. Gosh, this is, sorry. And then I'm one of the core members of Sunkiss Production, which is like a queer Viet film production company, and we just do a lot of stuff within the community. And then I'm a professor at UC Santa Cruz, doing mostly film audio for undergrad and grad. And then I think one of my more favorite things is I drum for a few bands, and right now I'm drumming for Tia No More, who's a Bay Area rapper. You may have seen her in Earth Mama if you watched that movie, that A24 film. So, anyways, becoming co-manager at Different Fur, I started as an intern 7 years ago and pretty much had to work for free for a year and a half, which wasn't the most fun, but also really, really fun because I got to meet so many different types of people and get into sessions that I never thought I could. But I sustained myself like working 2 other jobs, food jobs, and then I just slowly worked my way up from being an intern to an assistant engineer to an engineer, and now running the studio. I also, during that time I was an intern, I started a group called LMSFN with the studio owner at the time, where we would just throw a ton of parties and shows at the studio for free, because the Bay Area, like, there's not like house shows here, and all the shows are in venues that cost a ton of money, and we wanted to like try to revitalize the music scene in the Bay Area, without having like just the super rich tech people be able to go enjoy music. We wanted to curate kind of the younger audience, so we would just get a ton of bands, pay them, and then have it completely free for everyone. So that was a really fun time, and I think that helped me a lot in becoming really ingrained in the community in SF in Oakland, to be able to still be at the studio now. So currently, the biggest, or at least to me, the most fun and meaningful gigs that I'm doing right now is I'm working with a K-pop band called QYX. I've never met them, but we've been emailing online, and I help mix and master their music. I'm gonna go over there and have a writing camp and produce with them. So that's been really fun. I'm currently working on a Hulu documentary called Mother, which is a new bar in the Mission District of San Francisco. And I also have been working a lot with this artist named Karri, who is like an R&B artist in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And yeah, I feel like those are the ones I'm most excited about. I mostly work a lot in, just because of the landscape of the Bay Area, a lot of hip hop and pop and R&B, but my background is mostly in electronic music. But of course, I really love most genres. I feel like you kind of have to in this line of work. Yeah, so. The number one gig, I feel like that stuck out when I read this on the email, I was like, which one can I say? When I was an intern, I think I was pretty young and I didn't know anything at all. And after Outside Lands, Third Eye Blind, Diplo, and Halsey came in, and I was left to handle it by myself, which was really, really scary. But being in that session really taught me a lot, because They're obviously really famous, and you think all these things of them being on a pedestal and they know everything. They barely knew anything. And I was shocked at how much they didn't know, and I hope they never see this. But that was like really humanizing for me, because I was like, all these artists are just really out here trying their hardest. And like, I feel like when I was starting in this industry, I had huge imposter syndrome. And that helped me kind of be like, oh, wait, everyone's just kind of flailing out here, just doing what they like to do. But yeah, they didn't, like, Diplo didn't know Protools, which was shocking to me. But they were all really nice. And I think the number one thing that I've noticed with all, like, the bigger artists that I've worked with is not how skilled they are, but how hard they work. Like, they will work harder than anyone else I've ever seen. Like, I've seen people do straight 16-hour days, multiple days at a time. And I feel like that was a huge takeaway that really has shaped me as a person, is that we're all gonna kind of flail for a while and have it really intense imposter syndrome, but everyone else that we like look up to have to go through the exact same thing. It's just how hard you work. Some important skills that I use in my work, a lot of it is people skills, unfortunately, because it is a very, very social job. Being able to have conversations with the people you're collaborating with, see where they're coming from, making sure they feel safe so that you can get the best performance with them, and for them to feel like you understand them, to try to also communicate with them exactly what they're saying. So I think at the end of the day, the music industry, as technical as it is, I heard someone say once, a service job, because you are serving someone and trying to parse out how they're feeling. Yeah, so I think people skills really I have learned over the years. I think the number one thing I love about this is how much community there is in music. Like, it's just all over the world, and there's so many people out there also struggling and trying to go for their dreams and working their butt off from all different types of backgrounds, and being able to meet so many different people from different countries and different genres and different ways of thoughts and cultures, I think has been like the number one thing that I really enjoy about this job. Okay. So I'm gonna go over a ton of tiny mixing basic stuff and then actually show you in real time. I know a lot of you probably have taken classes and know a bit of this already, but just as an overview, the way that we look at wavelengths is the bigger the wavelength, the lower the frequency, and the faster the rotation of the wavelength, the higher the frequency. And the reason why that matters is because the larger the frequency, the wave is, and the lower the frequency, it travels farther. So that's why when you're outside a club, you only hear the bass, because lower frequencies can travel through walls, whereas higher frequencies will get filtered out from like any material. And this really matters when you're EQing or like hearing a ton of stems together and trying to figure out your organization of how you want to actually start your mix and what you're actually trying to achieve. Knowing the difference between low pitch and high pitch is super important. On the bottom, you can see that there's a frequency spectrum, whereas down, can you see? Yeah. Down here, 20 hertz, which is super low. Sub, we can't even hear it. We would only feel it. Usually we carve that out because it will just rumble everything. Usually 45 hertz is where we kind of drop off the sub in the mixing phase. And of course, 45 and lower, you'll start like the wavelengths will continue to 20. And then all the way up here, you can see 20K hertz, which is 20,000. That means 20,000 rotations. So this is how we pretty much visually hear frequencies within anything, any kind of sound. Okay, phasing. If you have two waveforms and they're exactly the same, if you stack them on top of each other, it will double in amplitude. Meaning, if you have one track of a song and you put another track of the exact same song on top of each other at the exact same time, it will just double in volume because it's additive. If you have a track of a song and then put another track of the song but shift it over and invert it, you will get no audio because it will cancel itself out. So waveforms are additive and subtractive. But that being said, people use it to their advantage a lot, like phasers or chorus. You can use it as an effect. But how sound interacts with each other is that it's constantly phasing in and out of each other. So if you have different waves, if you add them together, some parts of it will be phased and some of them would be additive, if that makes sense. The number one thing I feel like when you're doing audio work is knowing exactly your signal flow, because knowing where your sound is traveling, at every moment there's a gain stage, meaning you have to decide what level is going into each. And with electronics, every time you hit a certain electronic, it will add a certain coloration to that audio. So if you're starting here, say you're recording someone singing, the amplitude at what the person is singing and the pitch of their voice, you would want to record on a microphone, but the microphone you would want to choose like why you want to use that specific microphone. So if you have someone with like a super nasally voice or really high-pitched voice, maybe you want to choose a microphone that is darker so that it could carve out the top frequencies, and you would want to put it below the mouth because it's lower down here. As if a microphone was above the mouth, you would capture the higher frequencies. If the person sings really loud, you would want to distance yourself from the mic, or if they're really soft, really close to their face. So knowing what mic to choose first, to mic your person, and then choosing your preamp. If you wanted to do like voiceover, you would choose a really transparent preamp. You wouldn't choose like a really colored Neve preamp that adds a lot of harmonic distortion or electronic harmonic distortion. And then it goes into the computer, and then the studio. My whole point of this being, at every point you have control of how much audio you want to go in and how to color that audio. So we usually have to think about this all before we even start the mixing phase, because your mix in a lot of ways will only be as good as what is recorded. Of course, there's a lot of plugins and things you can do to like change the tone and things like that, but the higher the audio quality is in the way that you want it, the less you will have to do on the back end. And I think a lot of times people think the opposite way, where they're like, just do it. We're on a time crunch, let's just do it now. Do it quickly, and then we can just use like isotope or to get out noise, or a noise reduction program, or some EQ that is really fancy. But in the actual field, we try to just get the highest quality samples and recordings. If you're a music producer, your sample choice is really, really important. If you download just MP3s of like drum kicks and snares, you'll start hearing that distortion over time, instead of like, oh, I want this kick drum to be really subby. so that the snare will pop out a bit more. And I'm gonna do a high resolution wave file so I have more information to work with. Being really mindful of that really helps your mix. Yeah. So this is gain staging again. Usually we like to keep it around -12 when you're recording. When you're mixing, if you have like 10 stems, usually we like to hit it around -10 so that as the audio clips pretty much stack on top of each other at your master bus, which is like the last part of your mix, it will be around -6 decibels. And the reason why it's really important to have headroom is so that you have the low frequencies that take up a lot of space and travel really far. You have it to pretty much be able to be audible and you can control it. I think a lot of people, when they just start out, they don't do headroom or they don't pay attention to their gain staging. So then at the end of their mix, they're like, why is the bass so uncontrollable? Why is it taking up so much space? And you can't hear anything else. Like you can't hear the vocals. And it just doesn't sound the way that you want it to sound. It's because you probably don't have enough headroom. So louder is not better, actually. To actually hear things louder, you have to make things quiet, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Okay, EQ. EQ is just taking your frequency spectrum and shaping how you want it, additively or subtract. You have graphic EQs, which are more old school, where they'll have a set of frequencies, and you can either add or you can just subtract. If you're just starting out with EQ, I would use graphic EQ first, so that you can hear exactly where the frequencies are, so that when you're dealing with vocals, you know, like, oh, I've experimented with graphic EQs. I know around 5K is where sibilance is. I know that around 450 is where the throat of a vocal is. So if I want a more intimate performance, I could boost up the low mids. If I want a really pop vocal and I want it to sound really airy, I can boost up 10K and up. So I would just literally go down the line, boosting things and reducing things. But also with EQ, when you're actually mixing, you don't want to boost or cut that much. I usually only cut -1 or boost 2 tops, but I will use multiple EQs to do so. Same with parametric EQs. A parametric EQ is like a graphic EQ, except you can move. You'll get different nodes and you can like sweep with the frequency. So if you took a node like right here, boosted it really, really high, you can literally just sweep it across and you'll hear exactly what it's emphasizing. And that's really helpful to know where the harsh frequencies are. Also with parametric EQs, you get this kind of graph in real time where it will show exactly the frequency spectrum at a given moment. So if you put it on your master bus and you're like, wow, there's way too much bass, you will be able to see that and then reduce it. Or if you want a ton of bass and shake your car, you can boost it up more too. Just really quick filter types. High pass looks like this. It means that anything behind it, you will be cutting out. So you're only letting this through, and you're only letting the higher frequencies through. Low pass, same thing. You're only letting the lower frequencies go through. A low shelf is anything below that filter you can pull up or pull down equally. High shelf, same thing, but opposite. High frequencies up and down equally. A bell is what you'll most commonly see at a parametric EQ. You can make it as wide or as small as possible, and then you can just sweep and bring up or bring down, additive or subtractive. Q is how narrow or how wide you want it. So if you have a bell at 2K and you only want to get that one frequency out, you can make the Q really, really, really narrow and then boost it all the way up, see what actually is happening there, and then decide whether or not you want to reduce it. And then octave roll-off is just how steep you want the actual filter, high pass or low pass filter to be. Compression is a plugin that you will have in your DAW. There's also different audio external units for it, but pretty much it's just making that dynamic range smaller. So if you have really, really low, like quiet audio, and then in the same track you have really loud audio, essentially you're just smushing it a little bit, the dynamic range together. And you can control it with your ratio. You have all these components. I won't get into it, but pretty much your ratio is what's really, really important, where for every 2 decibels that is coming in for 2 to 1, it will give you 1 out. So if you have a really loud audio and you want to like really compress it and you put like 8-1, so for every 8 decibels, it will give you back 1. So in pop music, it's super compressed. So there is no, if you listen to pop music, there's not much dynamic range. Whereas if you listen to classical music, there's really, really quiet moments and then really loud moments. Yeah, you can use compression to emphasize or de-emphasize whatever you want. This is attack and release. Yeah, so with attack, you can change when you want it to turn on and when you want it to turn off. So if you have a kick drum and you want to compress the kick drum, but you still want to retain like where the beater actually hits the drum, you can keep that by doing a slower attack so that only in the body of the sample will it be compressed. So you can choose how fast or how slow. This is like a whole, I feel like 3 hours you can go into compression. But if you look to over here, this is essentially what it's doing. You set a threshold, you have an input signal of how much it goes over, and you decide how much you want it to be compressed. Yes, this is exactly what it looks like. You have this original audio file and you just want it to even out a little bit more. So then it will become like this, where all the peaks are pushed down and all the low, like quieter information gets pushed up, so it's more even. But with compression, you're compressing the dynamic signal, but also that means that you're making it quieter. So we have something called makeup gain, where you just make it as loud as you want again, which is this red part. So essentially what this person is doing is that they're compressing it so it's even and then making it loud enough again that it's kind of matching the loudest peaks of what it originally was. Okay, Pro Tools. Does anyone know Pro Tools or knows what it is? Yeah, okay, awesome. Mm-hmm. So Pro Tools is the industry standard, but a lot of people have been using Logic Pro as well because it's more affordable. But if you go into any studio situation, it will more likely be Pro Tools. But all these organization things are pretty much the same in any DAW, whether you're in Ableton, Fruity Loops, Reason, Logic. This is all kind of the same. You always want your naming conventions, your groupings, your cleanup to be very organized. And this is because it affects how your audio is going to be affected. So if you have like a kick drum that was imported in and it's actually mono, but it came in as stereo, which happens a lot, you would want to split it out and make it mono again, because even though it's seemingly mono in a stereo format, it actually is taking up space. So doing cleanup like that, where you go to every single stem, label it correctly, know exactly what instrument it is or what person it is, see if it's actually mono or stereo, and if for some reason your mono file is in stereo, splitting it out, making it mono, making everything really, really, really organized. And I could say that most audio engineers in the industry have their own way of doing this, but they're always organized, which sounds tedious and boring, but I really think it counts. And then when you have everything organized, then you're going to go into every stem and pretty much lower it to create that headroom with gain. So there's clip gain audio where you can lower it so that it's hitting around -10. You want to fade in and out your audio clips or else there'll be pops. Cut all the silences that you don't need in case there's some noise in there that you just don't know. Trim the edges. There's just a lot that you need to clean up before you even start mixing, because it all matters and it all is affected as you start using plugins. Also, any amount of audio will affect how much headroom and space and frequency width you have. I just made a resource list. I think you'll get these slides somehow, but this is just really good YouTube channels that you can watch that really explain things really well if you're trying to continue in this field. I've learned the most off of YouTube because I didn't go to like Expression College or SAE or learn this in any university. I learned this on the job as well as YouTube, and I really believe in YouTube University. And then a thing I would also do is go to whatever song or genre you want to work in, then go to Genius and see who actually wrote that song. And then more oftentimes than not, they'll probably have their own YouTube channel or class, and you can see exactly what they do. And I think over the pandemic, it was really cool because a lot of these producers and artists were doing this, where they were showing on Twitch or on YouTube exactly how they make their music from like the top artists. But yeah, oftentimes I'll go on Genius or Spotify and see if I really like a song, see who actually made the song. BMI, ASCAP is different companies for a PRO, which is everyone has, when they release music, they have their IPI number, which they register. So this is how song splits or like percentages and royalties work. If you are an artist and you want to release your music or you're collaborating with someone, I would suggest doing like a PRO of your choice and registering yourself, because if you're not registered and your song blows up or whoever you collaborated song blows up and you're not registered, you won't get any of that money or credit. And this happens a lot in the real world. Like my friend did the piano line of the Kanye song Monster, and Kanye on purpose didn't register him on the song. So he missed out on pretty much like a lot of money, and then he took him to court. And artists will do this all the time where they won't credit you because it's cheaper to get sued than it is to actually do the payouts of royalties. So I would just make sure that whenever you write music, you have all your PRO information on lock, just to protect yourself. A really cool way that I think is the most effective in collaboration is, of course, social media. I will reach out to artists that I really, really like to send them a song and be like, if you want to work on this together. And it has allowed me to work with people all around the world, and especially if you're trying to have a foot in this industry, knowing more people and collaborating with a lot of people is your best way in, especially if you're not already in a studio setting. I would just cold DM people, and it really works. People really like it. It's not creepy unless you are being creepy. So Instagram, SoundCloud. There's a thing called BandLab where they hire a lot of artists to make sample packs, and you can collab on there. I think it's free as well. And they have it's just like a really good website to make music on. Yeah, and forums and Reddit is really good. There's this artist named Igloo Ghost who was signed on to Brain Feeder Records, and the way he started was being on a ton of forums of like Tyler the Creator, and he just like collabed with so many people in those forums to the point that Flying Lotus actually saw him and noticed him and like listened to his music. So doing forums in Reddit is actually really great. And then writing camps. There's a lot of writing camps in the Bay Area or in LA. You can just search online and it'll just get a ton of artists in the room and you all just make music together. And most of like the biggest artists will have these writing camps as well. So the more writing camps you go to, the more you'll get used to the fast-paced writing style, which is super challenging, but it will really motivate you to know your stuff and self-teach and just practice a lot. This is a lot of popular DAWs on this side. They all range in price, but I will just still say that Protools is the industry standard for mixing and film. Logic has done a lot of upgrades to also be good in film, and also has similar capabilities to Ableton in how good it is in producing. Audacity, I think, is a part of the Adobe suite. Honestly, a lot of people make great music on GarageBand, so I wouldn't rule that out, especially if it's free if you have a Mac. Reason Cubase. And down here, here's just some websites that are free that you can check your work and audio, and then me and my friend's website that we write a lot of like articles and stuff and give away free sample packs if you want. Or you can just hit me up if you ever have questions in the future. Okay. So now, oh shoot, I have 15 minutes. I'm going to show you a demo. So I, at a point, was asked to write a ton of K-pop demos. So I would just go into the studio and give myself an hour to make something. So I just have a ton of these beats, I guess. And a lot of people do that really often. But usually in the mixing phase, so I made this in Ableton. I used really high quality samples that my friend made. I was really, really intentional about how each sound in my sound sample choices fit together. I think a lot of times people just choose whatever sample they think sounds good and then they'll just put it in the song. And then later, like, it's harder to carve out the EQs or it sounds muddy. A good songwriting trick is listening to what samples are out of the way of each other in the frequency spectrum. So I could do like a low kick and then put a higher kick on top of it. So I have like a click of a certain kick and then the thump of another kick. So with these, I try to pretty much think about the entire frequency spectrum and knowing that there will be a vocalist on this. So I tried to carve out the high mids and not choose any samples that would get in the way of a vocal. So I will import it in like this, put the tempo, and then I will name it and put them color code them, which seems very elementary, but it super helps. And I usually go lowest frequency to vocals. So kick for me is usually where I start off because it's going to be the meat of your beat, especially if I'm working in K-pop. I know that the beat is super important because it's where people want to dance pretty much. So then I do kick, snare, and then I go to higher frequencies. And then once I have that, I group them and I put them in their own bus or aux. And then I would put something like drums. So now all these are going into this aux so that I can affect all the drums together. And I will do that for everything usually. Like vocal samples, I'll put them in their own aux. And then everything else I will put in a master aux. So if I were to mute this, it will mute these two. If I mute the drums, here, I'll just play. If I were to mute the drums, I have that control. Like that. But so I will, organize things so they go into their own groups. And then you can see with this kick, it's the same on both left and right. So this is a stereo audio file, but this is technically mono. So I would split that up. So I know that it's mono and that I can just have it in the center. And then usually I will go over to the kick and try to monitor where it's hitting. Right now it's all the way at -0, which means it's way too loud. And I would try to reduce it to -10 so that there's a lot more headroom for me to work with. So -10. And then I'll just go down the line. I think a lot of mixing is just your gain control and how it fits together than it is using 8 plugins for every single track. If you're choosing high quality samples and thinking about your frequency spectrum before mixing, you can have it where you don't even have to use plugins that much. If you know what Mix with the Masters is, it's like a lot of like the top industry people, they do videos on how they do things. A lot of times they will barely do anything. Like there's a mastering engineer that got a track, listened to the whole thing, and because the mixing engineer was so competent, the mastering engineer only had to put an EQ and a limiter instead of having to go into the audio doing compression, automation, things like that. Okay, so let's just go to the end. So these are all the drums together. I want to look at what's actually happening. So this is my frequency spectrum right now. You can see that I lowered my kick so it's not hitting as hard. And you can see like the meat of the snare is a bit too high. And I have too much high-end information. So usually what I'll do is probably I'll lower the hat. Look at my spectrum again. Maybe raise the kick a little bit. And I think the drums samples are compressed enough that I don't need to do that much compression. So I'm only going to glue compress on the aux. over here. Go to, where is it? I have too many plugins. Why not? So I usually only hit on any compressor as well, only -1, because you usually don't need to go more than that. Can everyone hear this okay? Yeah? Okay. And then if I wanted to be really wild, I could, like, if I wanted this to sound like it's going through a radio, I can do a low cut. And then do a high cut. So it sounds like a radio, and then automate it. So that so if I wanted a radio effect to pretty much emphasize going into the big chorus part, I can do automation on the whole drums itself, so that when it hits on the chorus, it's a lot bigger. That's why it's also good to put markers of exactly where everything is. Like, I can go to the chorus, the verse, I can make things louder in certain sections. That's where the organization really comes in. Bass, you usually have to really pay attention to how it works with your kick, because it's usually in the same frequency. So this, I chose a pretty clean, subbier bass. And you can see that it's coming in mono, so I'm gonna split that out as well. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go to the kick, see where the meat of it is. You can see it's at 117. And then I'll go to my bass. Go to where 117 is. Make the cue a little bit smaller and reduce it so that I'm creating space for that kick. And now that they should sound a bit more glued together, instead of having to compensate using compression. With the bass, I can see that there's a bit of a strays over here. Let's take off clip gain line. You can see over here there's some frequencies that are louder. Because of that, I'm gonna compress the bass. I'm gonna use RVox, which is technically a compressor for vocals, but it also works really well on bass. So you can already hear that it's much more present. And I'm gonna bring it down to the same level it was before, but this is without with. So you can hear how much like poppier it is and more present. And the only reason why I'm doing that is because this is a pop track. So I have this really cool guitar sample that my friend made, but I want it to be a bit more present in its high end. So I'm also going to just compress it. But I want to hear the pick a little bit more. And so if I have a fast attack, it's going to turn on immediately when the guitar guitarish drum, so I want it to come a little later so that I can hear more of the attack of the pick. So I'm gonna do 15 milliseconds. Kind of bring it down. Alright, so now we have these chords. Sorry, I'm trying to go as quickly as possible. Since these chords have sevenths in them, like instead of just a major or minor chord, I put in a seventh chord, so it's gonna add a lot more frequencies across the frequency spectrum in there. So I know I'm gonna have to EQ this. So you can see it's sitting in the mid a little bit, but the vocals are usually gonna lie around 2K, so I'm just gonna bring it down a little bit in that area so that when I have a vocalist, it'll fit a bit more. But if you already can see, my kick was all the way down here, and my drums are really up here. My snare was already over here, and my bass was even lower, and now my chords are sitting in the middle range. So I haven't even had to EQ that much, but they're already all out of the way of each other. Say I want to make this a bit more vibey, I'm gonna just put a chorus on it. Okay. Or I want it to sound like it's in a big room. Now it sounds like it's more in a room. That is muddying up the mix a little bit, so maybe I don't want that. But if I did want that, I could do cool things like put a distortion after it so that the reverb is being distorted. You can get a lot of cool sounds like that, but I think for this, I would just keep the chorus because I just want it to be a chord. It's just gonna give the chordal information, and that's really it. I can do something like a multi-band where I'm able to control every part of the frequency differently. High-end information is a bit too loud for me, and I kind of want the body of this synth to be a little bit up. I can compress just the body of it and bring it up, and I can reduce this. I can also put an LFO, which is a really common production technique. We're sidechaining. Say I want this synth to pretty much just lower when the kick hits. I can split out the signal and send it on bus 1. So now you can see that this is the audio. It's saying, let's send it out via bus 1, and then I'm gonna go to my main chords, put a compressor on it, and say, look at whenever bus 1 has audio information, and then I can compress it just to that. So that's like a really extreme version. And you can carve out space that way too. Or make it like a really cool effect. Like when chill wave was a thing, they would do this all over the place. So I'm just only gonna do it a little bit so that it just gets out of the way of the kick. So that when you hear it all together, it's a bit more bouncy that way. I like to use noise a lot for risers to like drop into choruses. I don't think I even need to do much to these effects. I also put like this Game Boy effect. Okay, so the last thing, I have this vocal sample. But for me, I think it's way too abrasive. So I can put an effect on it to make it more characteristic. Like I want it to sound like it's more in a tape. I can put it in a tape and then put some reverb on it. And choose the different, and then have it bounce as well, using the same side chaining trick. Because it's a vocal sample, it's going to get in the way of if there's vocals. So that's why I want to mute it a bit. And then just carve out all this low-end information that I don't need. Maybe reduce it where the vocal range is, and maybe just bring some air to it. And then say I mixed it and I'm done with, and I like it. I can go to the master and pretty much limit it and affect it in the whole track at once. I also like in the master to check where my frequencies actually are. So I can see around the low mids, it's a bit hot. And usually with pop tracks, it's more high end and low end, and then it's like shaped as a U. And I have it opposite right now. So I probably would want to do this. This is a bit extreme, but usually pop tracks have more bass and high end. And then I would reduce where it's too hot in the mids. So this is before. This is after. It's a bit more sheen, a bit more pop. So knowing your genres is super important because all of them are EQ'd very, very differently. And then last thing I'll do is put a multi-band limiter on it, if it will let me. This might get really loud, and this allows me to hear exactly compressing the different frequency bands. I like to only compress a little bit. And I know exactly what I'm affecting. So there's not much high-end information here. So I would have to make the compressor pretty low, and then I want to raise up the bass and the high end. So this is without. This is together. It just sounds a little bit more glued. And then the last step I like to do is check what is actually happening on a LUFS level. So Spotify and all streaming services are usually around -9 LUFS. So you can see right here, my track is a bit quiet. So if I was a mastering engineer, I would probably check for this and try to make my integrated, which is the level over time, to be -9. Yeah, so that's also why gain staging is really important, because if you're trying to make your track sound loud, literally turning it up isn't going to actually make it turn loud, because we have things called decibels and LUFS, and decibels are the technical audio unit, and LUFS is how we perceive sound as humans. Sometimes when we have a track really, really low, but if it's mixed a certain way, it could sound louder than another track that is actually on a decibel level way louder. So you're just trying to compensate for that. So actually having headroom, controlling all your frequencies, and then monitoring your LUFS is the best way to go if you're trying to release music. That was a lot of information. Sorry, but yeah, if anyone has any questions, we can do that now.
Hi, just a quick question. You said that when you do the mixing, do you recommend the drums being like separated, like the kicks, the hi-hats, all of that, and then EQ them separately? Is that in any kind, in pop music or rock?
Yes. Because the wavelengths are so different between every single drum, like a kick drum will usually be longer than like a hi-hat, and they're such different frequencies that it would be really hard to control. If it was all together, I would always try to get everything separate. A lot of times you have like drum machines that they just feed you a 2-track. You would be able to be as controlled in how you affect each frequency. You can make things hit harder at certain points. You can like remove your snare at certain points either. It's just way better to have everything separated out.
Just one more. So
yeah.
Related to that one. So the difference between like an acoustic drums, with mics, and those samples that you can download, online.
Yeah.
Is it a big difference on like frequencies and amplitudes?
Yes, very, very big difference. And it also depends on what genre you're doing. Like electronic music, sometimes you can do live drums, but more often than not, you're using samples and you have a lot more control. But if you're recording like live drums, you have to be like really cognizant of your phasing, because the more mics you use, the more you're gonna run into issues. And if you want your kick to be thumpy and your snare to hit hard, you would have to use certain mics. Having it separated out, I still think it is very common, but things like the Beatles back in the day would only use 3 mics, and they would just keep it as it is. It's definitely just like what genre you're working in and how you want it to sound like, which is a very vague answer, but it's kind of, yeah, that's usually what it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like you can do all the mixing and the productions using the DAW, but do you still use the physical mixer or you still
When recording, I will usually use a SSL console, which is like an analog console, and I'll do some mixing going in, especially if I'm doing something like drums. It's the more mics you have, it's just the more complicated it gets. So I will use the EQ on the SSL to carve out certain frequencies. Or a lot of electronic musicians now like to do this thing where they'll make their track and then they'll dump it on like an analog console and mix on the console so that they have like that more vintagey sound, and it sounds really, really cool. I know Toro comes to our studio a lot and has been doing that a lot, so it's like a kind of a blend of new world, old world, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you like to drop off sub-frequencies at around 45 hertz just to avoid rumble in the mix. Is there a similar, like at the high end, is there a frequency where you just try to just cut off all that information?
Less so in the high frequency, but there are certain parts like 5K where sibilance really lies. So everything that's going to be really sharp to the ear will usually lie around 5K, 7K, and 12K, and just around that area.
Sure.
So instead of doing a roll off, because we could afford to do a roll off with those lower frequencies because the frequencies are a lot bigger. With high frequencies, since they're smaller, you don't have to cut as much. So we usually don't have to roll off unless you want a more tape sound. But yeah, I would mostly pay attention to your sibilance when you're in your high end.
Follow-up question?
Yeah.
The Kanye story. And when I was growing up, like people like Frank Zappa would rail against recording industry and recording executives. How nasty would you characterize the business today? Like how many people, I get that like, it's cheaper to deal with a lawsuit than pay people that they should have coming to them. How prevalent would you say that is?
Even worse. No, sorry. It's a mess. There's constant lawsuits. My friend worked with Columbia Records and has told me some horror stories. One that really stuck out to me was major labels will do a thing now where they'll have like their star artists, and I think at the time it was Katy Perry, and they would find all the young artists that sound like her and better, sign them and put them into contracts for like impossible amount of time and never allow them to release their music. So essentially it's just destroying their career.
Wow.
And labels will actively do that, and every label will give you money as well if you get signed, but that's recouped. It's just like a bank loan. So having labels, having streaming involved, it's the landscape of the music industry is really set up to kind of not be on the side of the artist ever. Even if Tidal tries to do it, I do know that Tidal is trying a thing right now where they want to do loans to artists, but directly. So it's not through a label, which seems kind of promising, but it's still just like even more of a mess than it used to be, unfortunately. Yeah, so it's so kind of sad.
Hi. Like working with G-Eazy and how much hours a week do you work?
Working with G-Eazy was chill. I mean, he comes a lot, and he would pretty much block out. He'll do these giant writing camps. Where it's like 3 days straight and they pretty much work day to night and never sleep, and they'll just like turn out a ton of music. He's a nice guy, a lot of cool music, so much music that you'll never hear. Like they will literally make like hundreds of demos and you'll hear 0 of it unless for some reason one of them hits really, really hard. And how many hours I work a week really varies, but it will be like, it could be like a month of like 16-hour days, or another month where it's only like 8-hour days sometimes. It's just, this industry is super fluctuating all the time that it's kind of hard to know. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, my question is, how difficult is it to register your recordings?
It's not that hard. There's things like CD Baby, which is like an online distribution, and there's a lot more now that these websites are allowing you to just register your own stuff. You don't need a label, you don't need anyone representing you, and I think you have to pay a fee, but I think there's more now that you don't. But CD Baby is the most common one.
And is it permanently, or is it every year? You have to renew it every year or something like that?
I think it's per song, I believe. I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
Hi, I know you work at Different First Studios, which has done like No Vacation, Toro, which are like 2 of my favorite artists. Oh, yeah. But I want to know, like, when you're working in a studio, like with people who have bought limited studio time as a recording engineer, like, how do you unlock a good studio take from someone like struggling to get it down that day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sometimes it's like literally stopping them and being like, let's go on a walk or let's take a break, let's talk about this. But it does get complicated because they're paying a lot of money. Like at our studio, it's $100 an hour, and most people are paying out of pocket. So I think this is where learning people skills is really important, because you have to be able to, like, you could think like, oh, this isn't good, but you have to be able to communicate that in a way that is really soft, I guess, or like understanding, because artists are so sensitive. So yeah, I think it is a lot of just learning people's skills, and taking a break, always taking a break. Yeah.
And yeah, thank you. And just one more question. I have like this very busy rock track with like acoustic drums, like multiple guitar layers, a lot of pads, bass. When you're mixing acoustic drums in like such a busy mix, would you recommend like cutting like the kick and snare frequencies out of like everything else? Or would you just recommend like good gain staging, like for the most part?
Yeah, gain stage. How is your drum separated?
Basically just like kick, snare, hi-hat, tom, cymbal. Then yeah.
Okay, then I would, if your track is really busy, I would clean it up a lot on the tails. So if the waveforms are long and there's certain parts you can't hear, I would cut all the silences so that you're pretty much creating samples out of your drums. And then do you have overheads on your?
I'm using Addictive Drums, which is a plugin.
Oh yeah. Yeah, with those, since they're super controlled, so I would just cut off the tails and then do slow attack for compression on the things you really want punchy. And I would start top down where it's like kick, snare, and then higher information. And I think more you're going to have to look at your guitars and carve your guitars, because electric guitars have a lot of frequencies across the entire spectrum. So I'd probably cut the low end of your guitars a lot more so that your kick and snare can come through. If you really want your drums to be like the meat of your track, and if it's like fast, then I would pay attention to everything else and fitting that using panning and EQ. Yeah.
Much.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions on like maybe like working towards an internship or something like that in the studio, like some suggestions?
Showing up to shows that you know that some artists or some engineers are directly related to certain artists, and even just cold emailing the studios that you want to be a part of. A lot of the times doing that won't get you a response, but you still have to try that. I think the best way is to make sure that you show up to shows or events and try to meet people, unfortunately. Because at our studio, we get like hundreds of requests and it's really hard to parse through. And of course, we want people to be involved. But if the ones that have made it through are the ones that we got to meet in person or we developed a relationship with in some way. Yeah. Yeah.
On your master strip, what is your effects chain? Do you do EQ first and then your limiter?
So I'll do a broad EQ, like a FabFilter Q3, and then I'll do a pretty much a glue compressor. That could be the one I really like. Let's see if I can show you actually. So I'll do a broad one like this, Q3, and then I will do like a Shadow Hills, which is a mastering compressor. And this allows me to pretty much glue everything together and do some sort of saturation. Shadow Hills is really tonal, and I think that's like part of my sound now is using Shadow Hills. And then after that, I would do a more surgical EQ to get out any frequencies that are popping out. And I like to use the BX Digital V3. And I'm a really mid-side EQer. So there's left and right and mid-side. So left, right is left ear, right ear. Mid-side is I'm looking at the center channel and then looking at the things on the side. I like doing that, so that's why I use this. So then I EQ the way that I want the center channel, and that's usually going to be my vocals, so I can get the sibilances out here without having to cut out on the sides. So I'll use a surgical EQ, and then I'll use Soothe, which is like a dynamic, it uses an algorithm that it triggers a certain way as the frequency comes in. Like all these other EQs, once you set it, and it's just gonna affect the entire thing. With something like Soothe, it changes as time goes on. And a lot of new like mixing engineer, like this is like kind of the new industry standard where people are using things like Soothe, where it's much more algorithmic. And then after that, I'll put like a multi-band limiter so that I'm even compressing more, but in the different frequency ranges. And then usually I would just leave it like that if I have a mastering engineer, and then they would handle the rest. A lot of the times mastering engineers wouldn't even want you to put any limiters. So if I had a really good mastering engineer, I would just keep it like this without the multi-band limiter. But most of the time I'm asked to kind of like master myself. So I then would put a master multi-band limiter, and then I would use a limiter, which is, this is probably the most famous, common use limiter, and it's pretty affordable. The FabFilter suite, I think, is one of the best, and you see it everywhere. If you have the funds to do it, I would definitely buy it. And I would use the Pro L2, and you have all these other algorithms. I usually like to do transparent, set my attack and release. Also, what's good about this limiter is there's dithering, which most mastering limiters have. But if I'm working in high resolution and I wanted to make it into CD format, which is like streaming, I would have to make it into MP3 16-bit 441. So I would put a ditherer on to reduce my 24-bit into 16-bit, and it will sound good. And I think what's also cool about this limiter is it shows you the LUFs as well over here. So I can just keep constantly monitoring. And I'm gonna turn this low because it's gonna be loud. It shows you in real time what's actually happening. And it has a fixed threshold because it's a limiter. So I can see exactly what's happening and how much is being reduced. Over here, and I can see this track is way too loud now, so I'd probably back off. And it also has all these. It's just really useful, but that's like my common mastering, or master bus. Sometimes I will put like an analog additive EQ just if I want it to sound really, really like a certain way. So this EQ is gorgeous sounding. I would only use EQs that are really tonal, like super, super tonal, as additive. And more often than not, you're gonna be subtractive EQing, like getting rid of frequencies. But if you wanna like shape the whole entire tone, using a really specific EQ like this. Yeah.
One more question, one last one, I guess.
What's your favorite thing about working in the music industry? What's the most difficult part?
I feel like my favorite part of it is that I get to meet so many different people and travel a lot. And I never get sick of music because it's just the best. and I get to learn and constantly be inspired. The hardest thing is it's, barely get sleep, and the pay is hard as well because it's such a freelance thing. And even as many accolades or artists you work with, it's like even the most, like I know a lot of people that have been quote unquote successful in the music industry and they're still struggling. Like one of my friends has a Grammy nomination but is also having to deliver food. It's just like the way that the music industry is kind of structured right now is like really hard. But I also think it's worth it to be in this, so yeah.
So you mentioned that you play drums, and then also I was just wondering a little bit about your musical background. You mentioned seventh chords and so on. So just wondering sort of, your, I guess, more traditional music background and how that may have informed your work.
Oh, totally. Growing up, my parents put me in piano lessons, and I did that for 7 years. And then I decided that I wanted to be like my brother, and I was like, ooh, I'm gonna do drums. And then I ended up going to UC Davis for drumming. So I was doing that and doing kind of the classical route of like going into orchestras and stuff. But there was like a concert that I did where I had to wait 45 minutes to hit a triangle, and then I realized this isn't for me. And then at the time I was working at the radio station, and there was like a lot of electronic music, so I used my piano training to kind of do that. So now I also, when I was starting drumming, my parents put me in lessons as well, so I was really fortunate in that. So I do have somewhat of a classical background, and that's how I'm able to navigate, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, that paired with all like the bands that I was involved in college, I think was, yeah, hopefully.
I think we have to wrap up. Maybe if anyone has any additional questions, Liana could be here for just a few more minutes, and maybe you could talk, one-on-one with them. But thank you so much for coming, and yeah, watch out for the recording of this. But thank you so much for coming, and keep an ear out for our upcoming talks later this year. All right.
Thanks. No. If you all ever have questions, like at any time, just email me. Like I really believe in accessibility, so I will always like respond. Yeah.
So I guess contact me if you want their email address. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Thank you.